What's up, fucker? It's your boy, the king of the internet know-nothings, Jack Slack, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on Monday morning following Fight Island 2.2, the second of this batch of Fight Island events, where they were basically relying on you caring because it was Fight Island. There were no names on this fight at all, on this card at all, rather. But let's get right into the bones of it. I think the main thing that people took away from it was Holly Holm had an interesting fight. And I've seen an awful lot of people being like, best Holly Holm's ever looked. And that's led to, rampant speculation on both, rampant exaggeration? I don't know. But, everyone who doesn't like Holly Holm is like, yeah, looked better than ever at 38. Suspicious face, or, the thinking emoji. And on the other side, we're like, oh yeah, now she's ready for the Nunes rematch. I think what this fight really did, you get this a lot in MMA and in boxing. I mean, boxing's a bit more forgivable because there's not as many different ways a fight can go in terms of if you've got huge problems with wrestling in MMA, you could have an amazing kickboxing match in your next fight, knock the dude out, and people would be like, oh, that's great, but everyone will know that you didn't do any wrestling in that fight defensively. Whereas in boxing, you might have issues on the inside or something, but you have a good fight and everyone forgets that. But one I always think about is like Junior Dos Santos with his running backwards onto the fence against Kane, and then he fought Mark Hunt, a completely different fighter, but still backing himself onto the fence in between these exchanges. And because of the spectacular knockout, everyone was like, man, he was looking sharp. I'd like to see this Junior Dos Santos against Cain Velasquez. I that's what I got a lot of in this fight between Holm and Aldana. And it is Irene, it's not Irene, but this was a card full of bad ring cry. It's weird, you go through phases of talking about these things, and I don't know if it's just because when you're thinking about something, you see it everywhere. There's a name for that. I think it's called a prolapse. No, I don't actually know what the name is, but we'll call it the Slack effect. But where you're thinking about something, so you see it more and more and more, and then it just feeds into this, you get a feedback loop of seeing it because you're thinking about it and thinking about it because you're seeing it. But, we've got a chance to talk about ringcraft, which has always been one of my big things. I did a series called Jack Slack's Ringcraft. Ahead of that Costa versus Adesanya match, we got to talk about it again. And then it looked like it was going to be a huge part of that fight. Turned out to be a huge part of that fight. Costa let himself down by not having any ringcraft. And then this week it was just all ringcraft again that I was seeing, or a lack of ringcraft. Holly Holm, this is the best she's looked since Ronda Rousey, because this is the most recent person to fight her exactly like Ronda Rousey. Not as wild aggression as Ronda Rousey, but just offering the same thing over and over and over again. And obviously, always with these things, caveat, Aldana's the one getting punched in the face, not me. But, we're not talking about what I'd do if I were in there with Holly Holm. That's for my fantasy fiction podcast. We're talking about what a very good fighter or someone who wants to be world class should be doing in against Holly Holm. And really, Irene Aldana did nothing to change the flow of the fight. And I think there's a point where you're getting hit anyway. So just, at that point, you should be accepting it and going, okay, well, I'm going to change something. If I get hit, I'm getting hit anyway. She at no point started fighting evasively or took a step back or looked like she didn't want to be hit anymore. Which leads, I think that would make me feel differently if she'd given up at some point or just gone, oh, I'm not enjoying this anymore, which is what I'd have done very early on. But the fact that she was still moving in and happy to take the shots moving in makes me think that there was a lot missing from her skill set, and perhaps her corner not being up to the task. I don't know if we got any translations between rounds. I didn't see any in this one. I noticed they didn't have a translator in for the Casey versus that Mongolian lad. So I can't really weigh in too much on what her corner were telling her. But I think she works out of a boxing, or what was mainly a boxing gym. So I'm very surprised that she came in with so little ability to cut off the ring. It's one thing to struggle to cut off the ring because it's a big ring, and the cage, because it's bigger than a ring and there are no corners, or no substantial corners. The more sides you add to a shape where all the sides are even, the more like a circle it begins to look. But if I'd seen her step across at any point like she was trying to cut the ring, I'd feel a lot better about it. I feel like she fought a fight that was tailor-made to Holly Holm in this one. Now, Holly Holm, to her credit, looked fantastic, and she much like Rousey, when someone is moving on to her punches, she can actually hurt people a lot more. She's not a big hitter normally, but once you start walking onto that left hand, she can really start to sting you. And where in the Rousey fight she was going down the outside of the lead leg quite a lot, this one was more of her like old school stuff. Like back in the day on my first YouTube channel, I made a little Holly Holm study, which was like her regional fights, where she circles to the inside of the opponent's lead leg, and as they pivot around to follow, she slams the left straight down the centre. It's the same thing that like changed Henry Cejudo's career. If you watched his fight with Wilson Hayes, he comes out southpaw against Hayes' orthodox, or vice versa, but he just keeps taking steps back and to the inside of Hayes' lead leg, spiralling inward, or spiralling outward, I suppose. But it's just how you change up an angle and drop away from the opponent. And a lot of the time you can convince them to follow or turn. And if they follow, you can crack them with a counter over their rear hand normally. And if they turn, you've got a good chance at stepping in and stinging them with your rear hand. Plus, the more that they bring their hands up to deal with that, the more you have the chance to slot in the body kick on the left side, which Holly Holm did several times, well, many times through this fight. Side kicks also look good. And Holly Holm uses the side kick typically as when people start to try and slide down the outside of her lead leg. And that's what Aldana looked to be doing this whole fight. She was sliding down the outside of the lead leg, which is what you tell someone to do, Southpaw 101 or versus Southpaw 101. But the problem is that if you just do that, maybe that would work when you were fighting like Lou Tendler in the 1920s, before there were any real Southpaws. But if you just do that and the other guy circles the other way, you're just circling. It doesn't. You're not taking an angle. You're trying to take an angle, and they're going nah. And Holly Holm will step up like feet into a T and side kick when you try and step down the side of her stance as well. But basically, Aldana just kept trying to step down the side. Holm kept sliding back in the other direction, and then any time she'd followed her around, she'd hit her in the face. It was really nice showing from Holly Holm. I appreciated that she was actually trying for the finish at the end, throwing really hard punches right up to the bell. Lots of ki-eyeing. And it really just, the people who were being like, suspicious that she's driving such an incredible pace at 38 years old or whatever. Holly Holm has always, regardless of what you believe about drugs, and my professional opinion is an awful lot of people are on them, even though we got USADA in. But regardless of what you think of that, Holly Holm has always been an amazing athlete. She won... what is she, like the most accomplished female boxer in the world by titles? And she did it under a kickboxing coach without really having a jab. You can't do that in men's boxing, but she did it mainly by being in an amazing shape and moving a lot. And before that, I think she was in high school football or something like that. Sorry, soccer, as you call it in America. But, so yeah, she's always had a good gas tank. She wasn't touched in this fight for the most part. It's one thing you can punch yourself out, yeah, but it's a lot easier to hit someone for 25 minutes when they're walking onto the punches than it is to hit and be hit for 25 minutes. I think people looking at this performance suspiciously, Aldana did nothing to tire Holm out except walk onto her punches at the same pace every time. So it's not like Holm was having to react and freak out at points in the fight. Plus, whenever Holm felt like it, she could get the takedowns easily, which honestly was quite encouraging, because if you remember the Cyborg fight, and the Cyborg fight is also a great example of how to step across and cut the ring on Holly Holm. And interestingly, Cyborg did a lot of her best work with a inside slip and a left hook, where Aldana's best weapon was supposed to be the left hook. Maybe is the left hook. I've seen her use a good left hook many times. She knocked out Katlin Vieira with a left hook, didn't she? But Holm with takedowns is encouraging, because if you remember the Cyborg fight, she'd get annoyed at being hit or beaten to the punch, or certainly beaten on the power in exchanges, and that's what and that's what Aldana should have been looking for, exchanges. Try and get 2-3 punch not combinations, but if you get Holly Holm standing around trying to throw punch, and Holly Holm was obliging her, she was throwing left straight right uppercut, left straight right uppercut. She was standing there for returns at certain points, but Aldana really couldn't do much. But if you remember that Cyborg fight, Holm was able to get double underhooks and push Cyborg to the fence, and then just do whatever she could hold her there free of charge. And if Cyborg ever put her to the fence, she'd dig the double underhooks, turn Cyborg onto the fence, and hold her there again. No trouble. And you're going, wow, you're out muscling Cyborg in the clinch. If this had been part of your game plan and you'd worked it into something offensive, that'd be quite cool. And then other clinch performances like the Jermaine Durandamy one where she just sort of held her against the fence and kneed her thigh. It always felt like Holly Holm, again, because of the athleticism, but also very technically clever. If she started applying takedowns in her game more, she might have success at an even higher level. And of course, despite being the boxer or the kickboxer, she fought Megan Anderson and just wrestled her effortlessly. So, if she could get more of that working and then use it against Nunes, that'd be interesting. I mean, really, the Nunes thing, like, if you watch their first fight, Holm is kind of freaked out by the power, like she was against Cyborg, but she's trying to, stomp on the knee and just stay out of range and stuff. And really, I think presumably a rematch happens at some point down the road if Holly Holm keeps fighting, because not enough of these girls can beat her. And, no disrespect to Holm, she is actually a really good fighter in that division, in both the divisions she fights in. But if she gets a rematch with Nunes, you gotta think, her strength is over the distance. And where Nunes has looked bad in the past has been in the later rounds, when she gets tired. Certainly not. I've seen people not make Nunes work, and then Nunes is fine in the later rounds, which is exactly what we were saying with Aldana here and Holm. But if you could actually move around her, get her swinging back, and stay fairly safe, that's Holm's path to victory. Try and get her tired, and either take the last 3 rounds or try and finish her late. Of course, she looked timid in the first fight, and also Nunes looked razor sharp against her. That was the perfect example. People were talking about the side kick to the knee and the oblique kick like it's unstoppable, and you've seen Adesanya and Dillashaw and people like that do these sort of counters, but Nunes did it perfect. Pulled the leg back, threw the high kick on the open side, because the person's gliding in side on. You can kick it. It's a good time to catch him in the head. It's just being able to. You've got to be sharp. You've got to be on point. And Nunes really was in that first fight. But, Aldana really never got past the stage of moving on a straight line, try and kick the lead leg as she circles out. But the problem was that there was too much distance between them at all times. She wasn't really chewing up the distance effectively. You got to double jab to get up. I mean, this is the same shit I was saying the other week. Double jabs. We need them in MMA. Or double right straights if you're fighting a southpaw, always good. But really, the problem was that every time she came forward, Holly Holm would glide off to the side and turn her around so that they were just coming straight back across the cage again. It's. I think I wrote this in Finding the Art, but it's good offensive ring craft is one exchange to the next. You might lose an exchange, you might get hit on the nose, and then doesn't matter. You've chewed up a bit of distance, and the guy's a little bit closer to the ropes now, or the fence, or whatever, the barbed wire, the edge of the cliff, wherever you're fighting, but. That's the point of strategy. It's beyond single engagements. It's where you're trying to move everything towards. If every time you go at Holly Holm, you're like, I'm going to get my angle and I'm going to shoot my right straight, or I'm going to kick her in the lead leg, and then it doesn't happen, and then you just turn around and do it again in the other direction, you're never going to make any progress towards finally landing some strikes along the fence or near the fence, or making her make bad decisions and circle out into a strike. And really, this was the story of all 3 of the women's matches on this card. Bad ring craft. Loma Lookboonmee versus Jinyu Frey. Jinyu Frey didn't get to the wrestling early enough. In the corner, she looked like she was just annoyed. She looked sulky, and her coach... Is her coach also her spouse? I can't remember, but her coach is like, we need to go now. What are we going to do? And she's like, go. But then she immediately comes out for round 3, pushes across the cage and gets her against the fence. And this was something I noticed in that fight and in the Jermaine Durandamy fight. These people who don't have very good ring cutting, cage cutting, whatever you want to call it, they seem to be able to catch people right at the start of the round. Maybe when you're not ready for it, maybe when you're not all the way in from your own corner. But it happened to both Jermaine Durandamy and Loma Lookboonmee, and it happened the other week too. But just someone can't get the opponent on the cage, and then they come out at the beginning of the round and they immediately push straight forward and get them onto the cage. More a failure in the opponent's ring circling and direction changing and angling out. But still, it's interesting that you can catch them right at the start of the round like that. And the same thing happened with Lima. She came out for round 3 or whatever it was, and immediately just spammed hands and ran in on a straight line. And it worked. Hadn't worked up to that point at all, but it worked right at the start of the 3rd round. And to link everything back to that Costa versus Adesanya fight we were talking about the other day, I was saying, getting a kick caught shouldn't be the end of an exchange. You don't wait there for the guy to kick your leg out. or fire back a combination. You know, you flow on from it. You've got to have stuff to do. And I specifically said, like, you can kick, get the kick caught, and enter on a collar tie and start trying to fight from the clinch. And Loma Lookboonmee did that to Jin Yu Frey. You know, she was very careful with when she kicked, because obviously the danger of being taken down is still there. But when she did kick and Frey took it and caught it against the body, she came down straight into the collar tie, changed off to a double collar tie, freed her leg, and started kneeing. And Lookboonmee's clinch work looked great in her first UFC fight. She had a lot of trouble with, was it Angie Hill beat her? And then she came back this one. She looked a lot better wrestling wise in the clinch, but she also was able to apply the same knees and controls that she was using before. And I think she's training with Tiger Muay Thai, isn't she? Because like that's where you're getting, Petty Yan has really interesting clinch tactics. Not a lot of great clinch strikers in MMA, but by trying to get that Muay Thai in with people who can already wrestle, or getting existing Muay Thai greats and teaching them to wrestle, you can start to bring out what is available in those areas. And it's very exciting, we're getting new shit in, and we're 25 years into this sport. Shout outs to Loma Lookboonmee for wearing an appropriately sized stringer or whatever the vest thing she wears is, because last time she wore like a baggy one, and not last time, the time she fought that girl with the ass like you've never seen. Can't remember her name, but yeah, when she fought that lass, and the girl just kept grabbing the vest to try and push her off. I saw some people saying, I hope Lookboonmee has enough success that they open a flyweight class. They didn't open a flyweight class with Michelle Waterson, who they were desperately trying to push. They're not going to do it for Loma Lookboonmee. Oh, atomweight, my bad. They had Seohee Ham at one point, and she was fighting strawweights who just dwarfed her gamely, and they were still like, nah, mate, off you go. 3 in a row lost, or whatever it was. Go back to Rising. And she's doing great in Asia. I think she's Road and Rising at the moment, isn't she? She was also wearing some of the snazziest gear I've seen in recent years in her Rising fight. But Germaine de Randamie also looked really good on this card, and it does kind of set up that rematch between Holly Holm and her, which, when you say it, doesn't sound at all interesting, but both of them had really good performances on this card. De Randamie beautifully moving around the ring, nice wide stance, looking to time Lima's jab. Like every time Lima started to try and move in behind a jab, she's taller than Lima, so she basically threw like a right hook. She didn't even have to bring it in over the arm in any way. She just threw a right hook cross counter across the top of the jab, and she had Lima like stumbling each time she landed it. She was using the uppercut nicely too. Like, I don't think she landed any good uppercuts, but she was using it nicely. Like, her back would start getting towards the fence, and she'd pump the jab and throw the uppercut, with a vicious woman's ki, just to show it. And Lima would step back a little bit, and she'd pivot around the lead leg and be back out into the center again. And again, that fight was much like the Holm one. Actually, Holmes was more like floating around the ring in a circle over and over again. De Randamie was going back one way, turning all the way around like 180, and then they'd come back the other way. Like a chase scene in Scooby-Doo. Lima did get a couple of takedowns. I thought De Randamie represented herself well on the ground. Obviously, that was the big area of weakness against Amanda Nunes. She did not look bad on the feet against Nunes. She was giving Nunes trouble. But when you're fighting a fighter of that caliber and you just give them the easy out of being able to take you down and you not be able to do anything about it, it's a real problem. I was actually surprised how well Lima stuck to her in the clinches, and she used a really nice inside reap. But De Randamie has done very well in the clinches in the past, like getting her hips back, posting the head, and hitting people with knees. And she's really quite tall for that weight class, so she gets a lot of distance on them. Like Yana Kunitskaya, like that's her move. She gets to the fence, gets double underhooks, posts the head, gets back, hits some knees. It's like a crapper version of what Loma Lookboonmee does. And it's so weird that her head coach and partner is Thiago Santos, because he could not pick more polar opposite styles. Kunitskaya, I'm going to grind my way to the double underhooks and very safely apply just enough knees to stop the referee breaking us. And then you got Thiago Santos, who's just like, yeah, I'm going to throw parts of my body at him and hope that one hits. But De Randamie caught her with the, I was going to say the Dustin Poirier guillotine, but I think Poirier's was arm in, which is always like generally less reliable. It takes a different kind of technique, and it takes someone who's pretty good at it to reliably catch it, and even then, not against thick-necked Russian wrestlers. But Germaine de Randamie managed to go like full Buddha fist, hand, palm, fist in palm. Sometimes called the power guillotine. It might be called the Mackenzie team. Is that the Mackenzie team? Palm and fist? And she choked her unconscious. And it was great because the ref was moving in to shake Lima's arm. And her corner go, leave her alone! She's just like, what? And he does it. And they're like, fuck. He realised she's unconscious. I was hoping she'd come round. Anyway, what else was on that card? There wasn't an awful lot good on this card, if I'm honest. It's probably going to be quite a short episode this week because just not a lot going on. I mean, that co-main event between Carlos Felipe and Jorgen de Castro was fat lads swinging, and it wasn't even good. Kyler Phillips versus Cameron Else. Cameron Else with that look that every lad in the 90s had in England. Plus, imagine going to a tattoo artist today and being like, I'm an MMA fighter and I want a lion on my belly. It's just... Why? It looks shit on Conor McGregor. It's not going to look better on you. Actually, his does look a little bit better because it's not as badly drawn. But, it depends. He might get it coloured in and then it'll probably look just as bad. But I did like that his name was Cam Cheetah. So I was immediately like, this lad. Or he's on the way to being a boy. But, just a back and forth of exchanging low kicks. Phillips eventually got on top of him, elbowed him, made him turn his back, and then elbowed him some more. And, it was a last-minute replacement versus a guy who's already in the UFC and already looking good. So pretty rough for Cameron Else. Hopefully they give him another fight to say thanks. Carlos Condit versus Court McGee was if you love Carlos Condit, watch this fight. But otherwise, I watched it and then in the aftermath, I saw a flood of articles on my Twitter being like, what's next for Carlos Condit back in the win column? And I was like, I'd be quite happy with just retirement, just have the win and leave on it. Because both of them looked very, very slow. Condit was trying some stuff from southpaw, which is something he's been doing recently. But really, it was just, Court McGee didn't really get to any takedowns despite being the wrestler. And Condit just sort of slowly threw punches and kicks at him. It was, it's hard to watch when you remember Carlos Condit back in the day. And Court McGee even back in the day was very good. Jourdain and Koulibaly went to a draw. What else is good? We've done McMinamy. And then Casey Kenny versus Alateng. That one, my wife was watching with me. And she's going like, what should he was Mongolian, wasn't he? What should Alateng be doing here? And I was like, well, he should be attempting a takedown or a clinch. And she goes, this is the third round. She goes, oh, you're allowed to do that? And I was like, yeah, no, you are allowed to do that. He's just not done any of it. And I appreciate that Kenny, I believe, had the wrestling scholarship. But, you got to try something different. Like, this is the difference, I believe, between just being a good combat sports athlete and actually being a good fighter. I think a good fighter has to be able to change things up, even when they're getting hit in the face. I think you've got to be able to say, okay, well, I'll try something different. Worst that happens is I get hit in the face again. Whereas just a combat sports athlete, just a regular good combat sports athlete is going to go, well, my thing's not working, but maybe next time I'll fight someone and then my thing will work again. Or I'll just keep trying and maybe they'll get tired and my thing will work. Anyway, I'm not going to milk that card because there was just not on it. I mean, we lost a few fights from that. What did we lose? Oh, fucking hell, we lost Oliveira versus Dariush. That's what I was excited for on that card. And then Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira, obviously, because of their umpteenth positive COVID test. But let's do a question or two before we get out of here for this episode. Dear Slack, the pariah and saviour of the world's Uriah Fabers. Oh, that's a tortured one, but I'm going to allow it. Long-time fan, first-time emailer. I've heard you mention your love of Pride-era Fedor many times on the show and confess that I, too, am a mark for the last emperor. But I'm curious, out of all the champs and legends in MMA that you've watched fight, what makes Fedor stand out from the pack? On a different note, in the recent Adesanya-Costa fight, I found myself reflecting on Izzy's heel turn, a widespread negative perception that has only grown since the Whittaker fight, that he is unlikable as opposed to when he was an upcoming prospect. Looking back, it seems like many admired fighters take a turn for the worse personality-wise after reaching the heights of their division. Why do you think this is? And what champs do you think were still popular or likable while at their peaks? Big thanks from Brisbane, Australia. Patreon boy Tom Tom. Brizzy! He's from Brizzy. Let's start with Fedor. Because I think there are, we're at the point where, though many of you would be reluctant to believe it, there are probably guys in the heavyweight division who would have beaten him at his best. Not many, I'm thinking mainly Stipe, Verdum on a very good day. I think Fedor versus Dos Santos would be very, very interesting, especially in the ring rather than the cage. And because Fedor didn't do a lot of grinding in corners. But yeah, to try and capture what was special about Fedor, you got to remember that like Fedor wasn't supposed to be a star in Pride. Nogueira was a star, and then they were trying to build to a rematch with Heath Herring because they'd had a great fight for the title, and Fedor just came from rings, beat the shit out of Heath Herring. We had a fairly boring fight with Sammy Schilt first, but then he beat the shit out of Heath Herring in what was supposed to be a number one contenders fight, and then he just made Nogueira look like he was no problem at all. In terms of stardom, you know, Mirko Cro Cop was always like a bigger star for Pride than Fedor was. But the thing about Fedor, like, compared to, say, modern heavyweights, is, you know, I don't like getting too caught up in like Killer Instinct and bollocks like that, because it is only a game at the end of the day. I mean, it's a game where people get hurt, and as I always say, you can legally beat someone to death in this game, so you've got to be really careful about it. But Fedor actually like looked like he wanted to kill people. You could get as much fun out of watching Fedor miss a punch at a grounded opponent as you could from watching him land a punch to a grounded opponent. It is just an incredible... I don't want to say realness, because that's what people talk about when they're talking about like Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal smack talking each other. They're so real. You're like, no, Fedor is real. Like, he doesn't talk about anything else. He's not like interested in telling you what he's going to do or how hard he's going to make your life or selling tickets by talking. And, you know, that is, in a promoter's sense, that's really not good. You know? But the thing was that he could sell tickets by just being that good. And I think by not saying much about it, it just added even more to the, you know, the aura. No one else really has had that aura. There was a little bit of it with like Igor Vovchanchin, but yeah, that like cool, almost unreadable exterior, which I suppose is why he's done quite well politicking in Russia. But to be able to hold that in the middle of a fight too is remarkable. Like, the guy never looked angry. Well, there were occasions when he looked a little bit angry, but he never showed pain or anything like that. He was just there, dead-eyed, swinging the hardest, nastiest punches you've ever seen at your head until the end. And then he was like, you're right. You know, there's that clip of him. Kevin Randleman almost paralyzes him by dropping him on his head with a suplex. Fedor rolls him over from the north-south, Kimura's him, and then the ref's trying to pull him off, and Fedor's like being pulled off, but makes sure that he pulls Randleman's elbow back in front of his body. To, you know, puts his arm back where it was to begin with. He's just yeah. There was something about him like that was really interesting. And add to that, like, the roundedness of his game as a heavyweight, the speed he had as a heavyweight, and the fact that when he was really good, he was coming in with good game plans. Like the Cro Cop one, masterful game plan. Because it's one thing to say put Cro Cop on the back foot, but dudes had been in there trying to do it, and Fedor was able to. You know, he'd worked. You know, it wasn't like he was just born able to do that. He went to Holland and he had Ernesto Houston, Tyrone Spong, a like prime Tyrone Spong, kick the shit out of him until he could check the fast kicks and slip the left straights. I think that's what's really crazy about it. Like, people obsess over the perfect record, and they'd be like, but the Tsuyoshi Kasaka fight, or, you know, or here's Blagoy Ivanov beating him in combat sambo. Like, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because on the day he wins. Fujita rocked him, though. Yeah, but it doesn't matter, because he won. And I think that was also just a large part of it. Just refusal to lose. You know, there were cracks in the armour, and that only made it more interesting. But yeah, if you've never seen Fedor, it's hard to describe, because if someone's never seen Fedor fight, and then you show them him throwing those punches down on Nogueira from his guard, or beating the tar out of Heath Herring, or running Cro Cop frantic with that pace, there's something different about him, and I haven't quite seen it in anyone else yet. And I suppose this links in with the question about Adesanya and his heel turn, and really it's the more you talk, the more people aren't going to like you. Like, that's the thing. Like, you know, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like, you know, if you put out 3 good articles a week and someone reads one that they don't like, they'll be like, oh, fucking hack slack or whatever. You know, the more you talk, the more people don't like you. And in fighting, it's important that people don't like you if you're one of the fighters, because the people who tune in to see you lose, they show up the same way as the people who tune in to see you win. It was Floyd Mayweather's whole thing. A lot less people liked Floyd Mayweather than begrudgingly respected him because he was really good or wanted to see him lose. And the ones who wanted to see him lose were the ones who weren't pirating the cards. They were paying for them. With Adesanya, I'm not inside his head, and I'm not going to ask him in one of our late night phone calls, but I think a lot of it is to do with this. Well, partly, if you beat someone absolutely beloved like Robert Whittaker, that won't help, but I think a lot of it is the John Jones thing, because I can't tell if he wants the John Jones fight or if he wants the clout from John Jones because he knows that John Jones won't fight him. Whether that's because John Jones wants to go up to heavyweight, or whether that's because John Jones wants to stick around at light heavyweight forever. But John Jones has his own obnoxious fan base, and riling them up is a great way to get attention. Why have so many admired fighters taken a turn for the worst personality-wise after reaching the heights of the division? Well, I think there's some extreme ones like Conor McGregor where you did have this guy you were sort of rooting for because he was... he was coming from not a lot of money. He was working very hard to get what he got. And Conor on the way up, contender Conor, the one that they're always talking about as like a mythical fighter, he'd take fights on short notice, he'd fight whoever, he'd come out and attack from the very get-go. He promised to go after the guy, and he would go after the guy. And he was genuinely quite funny in a lot of those interviews, and quite charming. And being able to make people laugh is incredibly endearing, even if they absolutely hate you. Being able to make people laugh and have a laugh at your own expense. And then when that became like the height of this was the Mayweather press conferences where they just shouted bitch at each other over and over again. I don't need you to have a cleverly scripted line, but you were funny when you were thinking about what you were saying, and that was quite likable. And I think bad publicity is the main form of publicity. People like Demetrius Johnson, but he wasn't getting anyone watching his fights. People like Chocolatito. People like those small guys who don't say a lot. But stardom seems to require a level of divisiveness. And of course, combat sports are built for divisiveness because everyone is either the greatest of all time or a bum. There's no in-between ground with a lot of fans, and you can be breaking the records and still be a bum in their eyes. So I think part of it is the game encourages it. Part of it is just the more you see of people, the more things you're going to see that you don't like. And that's with everyone, anywhere, always. And Twitter and things especially give us every day I tweet out a joke that I'm then like, nah, maybe not, and delete it. I'm not Israel Adesanya. I'm not famous. People aren't like keeping an eye on it going, that was a clanger of a joke. Better save that one. I would say with Izzy, I think it's certainly more due to more exposure and desire for further exposure than with like the Conor McGregor thing where he very clearly did take a turn for the worse in terms of likability. Cheers, Tom Tom. Oh, and what champs do you think were still likable or popular at their peaks? The obvious ones are like GSP, Fedor. And Fedor, like as we were talking about just then, Fedor did it by never saying anything. George St. Pierre was very straight-laced and didn't often have a lot to say. The reason that Josh Koscheck interview where he's like, I am going to beat Josh Koscheck and then he's going to have a good think about whether he wants to fight anymore. That was badass because he never did anything like that. He never really said anything like that. He was always just like, yes, I lost to Matt Hughes last time, but I can't promise I won't lose again, but I won't lose the same way twice. And, that's very hard to sell, rather than I am the greatest of all time and everyone knows it. And if you don't agree, you're a bitch boy, and that sort of stuff. Even with Fedor, who didn't say anything, you had rabid haters of Fedor. That's just being at all famous in anything. Unless you're David Attenborough, a lot of people are going to hate you. Like it's just how it works. It's like the YouTube likes and dislikes. You will never get 100% likes. There is always going to be 2, even if it's like 50,000 likes. Dear Slacky J, I recently began practicing stance switching on the heavy bag at home, and I find that I am a wobbly hot mess in the southpaw position, as I've always trained in an orthodox position. While I have noticed a lot of stance switching in MMA, it does not seem so prevalent in boxing. I was wondering why this is the case. There are clear advantages in MMA for certain fighters to be in certain stances, e.g. kicking into the open side. Are there similar advantages in boxing? Yeah, everything like closed and open side still apply in boxing, but it's more to do with like, can they get down behind their lead shoulder? Can you stretch them out and fire over their hand? If you are southpaw versus orthodox and you drop back to your left like Holm does every time the opponent attacks, and they reach for you with a right straight and they fall short, you can go over the top of that right hand with your left. That open side counter. So many people use it. Stephen Thompson, Conor McGregor, Lomachenko. Tenshin Nasukawa, every sport, dudes are doing that now. The reason stance switching doesn't happen a lot in boxing, I believe, a couple of reasons. Firstly, tradition. It took long enough to get proper southpaws in because it used to be like, you're left-handed, eh? Well, we'll switch you to orthodox, and then you'll just have a really good jab, like every boxer should anyway. But also the range. The range is different when you're not dealing with kicks and you're comfortable staying inside, so that you can continue slipping and working and creating longer exchanges and combinations. But I will say that some of the best boxers in recent years have been using both stances, and it's not. I think a lot of people would go, well, they're getting away with it because they're Andre Ward or whoever, and I would say no, it's part of why they're doing so well. It's they're not just getting away with the stance switching because they're that person. The stance switching is helping them. So Tyson Fury fights out of both stances. Andre Ward switches between them. He did a lot of that against was it Kovalev? The first time, I believe he did a couple of walking shifts and things against Chad Dawson. Gennady Golovkin likes shifts quite a lot, but doesn't really work from southpaw as much. But Danny Jacobs did a great job against Golovkin using both stances, but got caught while switching between stances because Golovkin would just wait while he was orthodox. Or this is what Golovkin was orthodox with him, waiting for him to switch, and the moment that he switched, Golovkin threw his right hand long. Without waiting. A lot of the time when you switch stances, the guy will take a minute to take in that you're switching stances, but if you're waiting for a guy to switch stances, you throw to the opening that's about to open up. And that's the thing about switching stances generally. You've got to know what's there for you. So when you see like a switch hitter against another switch hitter, it becomes a sloppy mess because they're both... If you are the changing thing and the other guy's the constant, you know what you can throw off each side. So if you're orthodox and I'm switching, I'll go, well, I'm orthodox. I'll kick into the back of his lead leg from orthodox and jab. And then when I switch to southpaw, I'll be throwing kicks into the open side to the body and the head. But if you're switching as well, I'm having a nightmare. You saw that in brief moments from O'Malley versus Vera. Then you've got guys like Bud Crawford, who seems to take one stance for the majority of a fight, and it'll depend on his opponent. So he barely fought southpaw at all for the first couple of rounds against Amir Khan. But then there's been fights where he fights almost entirely southpaw. It seems to depend on what he's seen in the opponent. And that's what, that's the martial arts ideal. You want to be, empty, void, the what's it called? The Musashi's Book of Emptiness or whatever it is. You're supposed to have no form, no shape. And the opponent, you just work with what the opponent gives you, and he's lashing out at nothing. There's nothing constant there. Obviously, it doesn't work. If you want to be good at something at any good sort of level, you have to have staples that you can fall back on. You have, your 1-2 and your nice combination that you can rely on, your moneymaker. So it doesn't happen that way, but that's what Bud Crawford sort of brings in the boxing ring. He very much adjusts his style almost entirely to his opponent, or what he thinks he sees in the opponent. So it's coming in boxing is what I'd say. It's just not very prevalent yet, which is interesting because, we're 200 years into the development of gloved boxing and there's still new things coming up, which is awesome. I will say that Marvin Hagler was one of the earlier notable switch hitters in boxing, and Ray Leonard, I think it was, said he had a lot of trouble working Hagler out. And one of the things that he worked out while he was in there with Hagler was that from both stances, Hagler had a lot of power from his right, but didn't have a lot from his left. So where the left straight down the centre would be a big issue against a lot of southpaws, it wasn't so much against Hagler. He was having to deal with just sort of the right hook. And that's the thing. If you are stance switching, you aren't going to be able to do everything off both stances. You are making the calculated decision that I'm going to get good at these sort of things. And maybe my main stance, if I'm orthodox, maybe my orthodox stance suffers a little bit while I'm working on those southpaw things or working to be able to switch. But keep at it, if you can learn 3 or 4 things you can do from southpaw and slip a punch or two, you only have to switch momentarily, and then you've got a little bit of an advantage for a moment, maybe 1 round, 2 rounds of a fight. Cheers, Tom. That was also Tom, by the way. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm going to write something for the Patreon boys. I can't decide. It could be a tactical guide to Marlon Moraes versus Corey Sandhagen, because I think that's a terrific fight, which is coming up at the weekend. Or I could do something on Giga Chikadze, which could be, he could lose because he's not been unstoppable in the UFC by any means. He got 2 split decisions and then a decision, but he is a lot of fun, and I think he has potential there. But you guys, let me know what do you want to hear about in this week's Patreon piece. And if you want to get in on the Patreon and read all that stuff, get in on the extra things we do for the Patreon boys, support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack. All hail Amanda Nunes, the real mum champ.